Yeah. I have. Yeah.
Testing, testing.
Good morning. We'd like to call the Oxnard City Council Public Works and Transportation Committee meeting to order. It's a special Public Works and Transportation Committee meeting. Today, dealing with speed hump policy workshop. Saturday, 10, we're shooting for 10 to 12. If it goes a little bit longer, it goes a little bit longer. There are Zoom details available if people have looked at the agenda. There are phone numbers and opportunities to meet, but because of Measure M, there is not a presentation, a full tilt presentation. And we will go, I'll read a couple of statements here. Zoom details and call for public comments during a meeting. Number one, phone number 888-475-4499. I'll repeat that. The phone number to dial in, 888-475-4499. You enter the meeting ID. That's step 2. The meeting ID is 889-8645-6342. I'll repeat it. 889-8645-6342. And then there's step 3, a passcode. So the passcode is 484242. Repeat it, 484242. If you wish to speak during public comment for a particular item on the agenda, please sign in on the following Zoom calling in steps listed above, those 3 steps. Once the mayor calls for public speakers, you press *9 to raise your hand. It'll indicate on the board over here. To inform the city clerk that you would like to speak during the public speaking section for that particular item on the agenda while in the Zoom waiting room. This meeting is being held in accordance with Assembly Bill 361, allowing members of the City Council, members of the public, and staff to participate via teleconference. Consistent with city policies imposed to promote social distancing, the facility where the City Council regularly meets is temporarily closed to the public at times, but at the current time it is open. The public is encouraged to view the meeting from home on Spectrum Channel 10, Frontier Channel 35, or YouTube at youtube.com/Oxnard News. Video recordings of the meeting are typically available online following the meeting at the city website at www.oxnard.org.
¿Me escuchas? Hello.
/city-meetings. And with that, we'd like to start the meeting. If the city clerk could take the roll, please.
Member Lopez,
Here.
Mayor Zaragoza,
Here.
Chair Perello,
Here.
we have a quorum. And the agenda for this meeting was posted on the City Hall Bulletin Board on September 9.
And I'd like to have the city manager lead us in the flag salute, please. Thank you. Just as a personal comment, this is a little bit normal size meeting. but this would be the normal size for a full tilt city council meeting. This is a pretty good show for a public works committee meeting, which normally starts at 8:30 in the evening. So I'm grateful we're having an opportunity to do this. By hand, by show of hands, how many of you have had an opportunity to look at the pre-recorded Measure M required video? How many of you have had can anybody that's done it, please raise your hands? Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to make a comment. So thanks to Measure M, we can't make the presentation. So this is going to be a little bit difficult, but we're going to do our best to convey what we're trying to discuss here today. It's really difficult to have a meaningful dialogue with the community if you don't get to see the presentation. So again, this is imposed on us, not our choice, but we'll try to get through this. Thank you.
And just for the public that is watching, I didn't see one single hand go up in the audience. So it's not scolding you or nothing, but just curious. A lot of work and effort goes into those presentations, but okay. We'll start with reports. Item B. B1, Public Works Department subject proposed speed hump program recommendation that the Public Works and Transportation Committee receive and comment on proposed speed hump program and recommend the proposed program be presented to the City Council for their comments and approval. Again, because I'll read the statement here because of Measure M. Please click the following link to review the required Measure M pre-recorded presentation, and there is a link, and you have a contact phone number for the Public Works Director. We do have received various public comments in the form of letters, and I do have one speaker card. We'll take the presentation if my committee members in agreement before we take the speaker. We'll question and answer. Okay, we'll take the question and answers. I beg your pardon. We'll take the question and answers, my screw up. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, before the public speakers. But with respect to the public speakers, when we get to there on the letters, I will be asking how many letters we got and if there is an idea of positive or negative on those letters. Okay. Council members, do you have any questions or comments with regard to the presentation?
So we're going to do the public comments after the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have any specific questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I can ask Mr. Wolf, as I was sharing with the community at some of the neighborhood councils about this meeting and the discussion around, I kept saying speed bumps, and you provide information that there's a difference between a speed bump and a speed hump. So can you share what those differences are and what we're talking about here?
Yeah, good morning, committee members. Michael Wolf, Director of Public Works. So from an engineering perspective, there's a very big difference between speed humps and speed bumps. Speed humps are engineered devices. They are designed to create a regular flow of traffic. They are designed to create a reduction in speed in certain situations, but not to make somebody come to a complete stop. We don't want complete stops in the middle of street segments. We want to be able to have a regular flow of traffic. And so those are engineered designed parabolic devices that allow for certain speeds. A speed bump is what you would find, for example, in a parking lot, or maybe in an HOA area where you're trying to keep the speeds down to like 5 miles an hour. They are very jarring. They are not engineered. They usually are very hastily installed for different reasons. They're not analyzed or reviewed. In fact, they don't really have a play in our professional world, in our ITE, at the International Traffic Engineers world. They're not a recognized device. They are not engineered. So that's the difference.
Well, Mr. Wolf, information you gave us is this way, consider the speed hump, the program. And there's about 4 or 5 bullets that you have there, that, you know, like what are many, there's many calming tools for that, you know, the speed bumps. And then cut through traffic on residential areas, and also talk about having more than, we've had some 200 plus requests over the 5 years, and also the engineering approaches. And can you share a little bit more information on those 5 points, and especially the one that says about cut through traffic? Mhm.
So we as engineers, you know, the city has obviously a responsibility of the right of way, the city streets. And we want to make sure that we do the best that we can from a liability and responsibility standpoint. And we want to make sure we have all the tools available to us. And this is actually one of the very unique tools that right now currently, since we don't have a program, it's not available to us in a fashion that would be responsible. And so as my team was putting together this program and looking at kind of considering why, we wanted to list out the certain things that should be considered if we want a program. Again, as engineers, we really want to have the right tool to address the problem, if there is a problem, and to avoid using the wrong tool to fix the problem, because you actually create something different. And so when we talk about traffic calming devices from an engineering perspective, those are a multitude of engineering methodologies that allow us to address certain types of issues, whether it's speeding, whether it's volume, those kinds of things. And so some examples may be different, a roundabout that actually has some value to it in unique circumstances. That is considered a traffic calming device. Radar feedback signs are traffic calming devices. We may change the configuration of the lanes. We may narrow them. We may take away a lane, road diet or lane diet. They actually have different names to address certain issues, normally speeding in those situations. Now, cut through traffic specifically. So, and you can imagine a scenario where 50 years ago, from a planning perspective, a neighborhood was designed and constructed, and the world around it grew up and created intersections that may not have been there when the neighborhood was there. And those intersections, some people get a little, some people want to avoid those intersections because it potentially delays their process. And so they try to find, it's like water. They try to find the easiest path, the least path of resistance is kind of the process that cut through traffic is looking for. And so where you have residential streets that parallel major arterials or collectors, some folks decide to use the residential street to make that commute. So they avoid the intersection because there may be a 60-second delay because of this traffic signal. So sometimes when we install speed humps, we see a reduction in that cut through traffic. And it's one of the tools to try to address that. So that's the cut through traffic.
Okay.
I also wanted to mention in kind of why we want to consider, or why we're recommending the committee and then eventually council to consider a program, is because we also not only strongly recommend a program to have that tool in our toolbox, but also if we do have it, how do we prioritize the locations? Like how do we make a list, basically? We can't do them all. We're going to get, having come from other agencies that have this, there are usually multiple requests for this, which we have to understand then, and hopefully there'll be questions about pros and cons, because I really want to get into the pros and cons. We really got to consider that this is not the solution every time. And there's a lot of reasons why it's not the solution every time, but it needs to be, I suggest it needs to be a solution that's available to us, so that, and then be able to establish those priorities, like how do we rank them? So that's kind of some of the bullet points that are on that slide.
Thank you.
If I can just comment on that, that sounds very much like the complaints that as a council member we get, and I'm sure other council members get. There are main intersections that are surrounded by various neighborhoods. And now the neighborhoods feel that they have a main thoroughfare through the center of their neighborhood because people don't want to wait at the intersection. And the concern with the neighborhoods, the residential speed limit in a neighborhood is a little bit less than it is on the thoroughfares. And people are, they're getting a little bit hesitant. They're getting really rude and careless with how they have to get to work because they took a little too long getting ready to get to work. That's my opinion. And I've been guilty of that too. So any further question?
No, I am sure that we have other questions, but we're probably going to go into
But, okay,
what we can do and what we cannot do, but
on the bullet point that you have with roughly 205 years, do you feel that's significant?
So that's a sort of cumulative of all of our traffic calming requests. It's not specific to speed humps. I just want to clarify that, but that's a significant amount of requests. I mean, that if you could think about the other things that we're already doing, we already are doing projects, capital improvement projects, operation and maintenance projects. We're doing all those things to address what we already are seeing. I mean, we are already seeing and monitoring. We have a traffic management center where we have staff that monitors that, and we have city staff that actually drive the street a lot. I mean, we have solid waste truck drivers that are out there every day. I mean, so we get feedback. So on top of all those other things that we have, we're getting 200 requests for traffic calming devices. And so we see that as a significant amount, only because, again, this goes back to if we only have a smaller number of tools to fix the job, then we get to, unfortunately, we have to say no sometimes. And in the public works world and the engineering world and the liability and regulations, sometimes we have to say no, unfortunately. But we want to make sure that we have all the tools in case, so that sometimes we can say yes.
200 over 5 years, it doesn't sound like a lot. But realistically, ladies and gentlemen, whether it's bumps or potholes or garbage on the street or stray animals, it takes a lot for a member of the public to get in touch with the city of Oxnard. It's extremely easy for people to go on social media and just bombs away on the city of Oxnard. And I'm guessing it's 10, 15 to 1 the way that happens, because we get clobbered in social media. And you ask, when you try to reach out and you finally do get somebody who's at night working on a keyboard, and ask them, why didn't you get a hold of the city? Well, it doesn't do any good, is their common thing. So realistically, I've had a change of opinion when I first saw this 200 over 5 years. That is a lot. We don't know if it's the first 5 years, the last 5 years, but it's a lot. And I can tell you also, as a member who sits on this committee, the number of people from the public that have shown up today on a Saturday, that indicates it's a lot. There's interest in this item.
that one quick question, Michael. The reason I'm asking about the cut through traffic is because the council member, I mentioned I have a lot of complaints from individuals that live, excuse me, on Kencha Street between Vineyard and the park. So when the cars get off of Vineyard, they zoom right down all the way to that park. And there's no stop at the end, and they curve right into to the right. I can't remember the name of that one street there. And that's what I think maybe the cut through traffic might be one of the problems, that I'm not mentioning streets, but I get a lot of calls from that street because people get off of from Vineyard onto Kencha Street and right into that park without even stopping, and they make a right or a left, just for. Is that potentially like a cut through traffic through a residential area?
As described, we would consider potentially a cut through traffic, but if that's the only way to get someplace, it's not cut through traffic. It's the
Okay.
destination process. And so the cut through traffic, again, the prime example is a residential streets that parallels a collector or an arterial where they're using it to sort of bypass.
It's similar to a freeway when there's a traffic jam
Right.
up ahead, you can, according to your computer, you can get off and follow parallel to that traffic. Okay.
And your point's taken, Mayor, with the devices that we have and applications that we have where it doesn't consider residential streets. It doesn't consider places like that. So you see a lot of routing during maybe special events or
Okay.
the morning traffic. You may be routed through a residential street if you're actually using those devices.
Thank you.
The name of the street, Mayor, is Quail Run Way, and I can tell you it's right by the Rio del Norte School. And you're 100% right.
Mhm.
Picking up and dropping off kids, people that drive through the South Bank neighborhood like maniacs. And the police department has helped tremendously, but after a while, they have other things to do. And as a side note, a principal a few years ago trying to stop the residents from picking up their kids and driving erratically had his foot run over,
Mhm.
and they didn't even stop. The guy's yelling, they didn't even stop. So the speed bumps is not going to take care of that, but that's the some of the issues with the local drivers.
Mr. Chair, if I could just maybe make a comment, we're talking about the program as a whole today. I would
Yeah.
really hesitate to talk about specific streets. Because as we get deeper into the questions, hopefully we're talking about where and when.
My apologies, but I wanted to just bring that up because
Mr. Chair, it's starting to feel to me like we're just having an insider conversation here and the audience is, I want to try to help structure this conversation. So if I can just ask Mr. Wolf to now discuss what speed humps can do, what they can't do, and then the pros and cons.
right.
If in the presentation, there is something of pictures of speed humps, can we put that can we put it up?
It's okay to show the presentation? Okay.
Just that one picture, please. But if you can discuss again, what speed humps can do, what they can't do, and let's begin
That's right.
then with the pros and cons, and then we'll continue.
Okay.
So if you're tracking, it's actually page 13 of the
Mhm.
agenda package, and it's the slide that talks about the considerations of kind of what they do and what they can't do. And as mentioned in the very beginning, to us as engineers, this is typically sort of the end of the line tool. Because as we'll get into the pros and cons, you'll see why.
Mhm.
And so we don't want, this is not the first item out of the barn for us to make a solution, to do a solution. But what they can do when it's the right tool for the right job, what they can do is they do reduce speed. The study indicates there could be as much as a 10 to 15% speed reduction used in the right location, the right spacing, the right design. And they also can reduce cut through traffic, because again, the people trying to make up time will find out that that's not a time saver in those locations. But what they can't do, I think it's as important to understand what they can't do, and what we shouldn't do is they shouldn't be put on our major arterials or collector streets. Those major arterials and collector streets are actually designed and are used for certain purposes. And you have several folks here today that can really define that. You have the fire chief online, you have the police chief, Sergeant Diaz, the fire marshal. They can talk about what speed humps mean to them and from a response time. And I think that's very important to discuss today, is what does that mean from a response time? What we typically want to make sure we do is we don't just put one speed hump, because that actually, from a study standpoint, doesn't solve the problem. You're speeding up to the speed hump, slowing down at the speed hump, and then speeding away. They don't actually solve any problem. In fact, if you look at some of the studies, they increase the speed. So they usually are typically done in a group of three. Spaced correctly on a residential street, a group of three will reduce that speed down again as much as 5, 10, or 15%.
Can I ask Mr. Wolf, if you're talking about a series of three, do you also have to look at the length or the distance of the street? And that's a factor, I assume? Yeah,
so that's a great question. It's actually in our presentation. If you look at, it's actually slide 8, the agenda package, page 17. If you look there, we are recommending a minimum criteria of at least 1,000 foot. Again, these are engineered solutions, and they have to work in tandem with each other, or together with each other. And if they don't, you actually create bigger problems. You're not only not solving the problem, you're creating other problems with it. So we do suggest some minimum criteria, which is pretty standard. If you look at most local agencies that have a speed hump program, you'll see that the criteria that we use is pretty standard across the board. In fact, there's Caltrans recommendations, and ITE, the International Transportation Engineers, put together some recommendations, and we kind of followed that really closely. The other thing I wanted to suggest or talk about was what they can't do. We've got to be very careful about, again, creating another problem that didn't exist, or that there's a problem that this will increase. And so, for example, Oxnard is relatively flat from a city standpoint, from an elevation standpoint. And we all know that there are places in Oxnard when it does rain, fingers crossed, right? When it does rain, we have places that potentially have ponding or flooding. And so when you introduce another vertical impediment, you may increase that ponding, or you may actually create a new place where water ponds on streets. And that's a bad thing to happen. Hydroplaning just all the things that go with it. So we have to be very careful about placing these in certain places that we already either know there is a ponding or flooding issue or a drainage issue, and then not creating a new one.
One of the things we found is that with the placement of speed bumps that are in certain parts of the city of Oxnard, the people that had been complaining about high speed through neighborhoods, now some of the people closest to the speed bumps are starting to make complaints about noise. And I had an opportunity to go to one of these sites, and they were complaining about a certain time of the day when people who work for a living, being Oxnard's a blue collar community, have pickup trucks and equipment in their pickup trucks. When they hit the speed bump, everything in the truck bed lifts up and bangs on the bottom of the pickup bed, making a noise that bothers the people in the homes. And the somewhat humorous one, the person that is complaining now was the one that was complaining about the speed. So they'd like to have the speed bump moved to a different location. How do we address something like that?
With the chair's indulgence, if we could maybe put the slide up on the cons, because
Please.
that's actually one of the things that I think we should talk about.
Please do.
And we can come back to the pictures, because when we talk about response times, we'll want to look at the pictures because that actually tells a good story. One more, please. So as Councilmember Perello or Chair Perello suggested, that one of the cons is noise. We kind of have a saying sometimes, no good deed goes unpunished, right? And so you're trying to solve a problem and creating a new one. And so there are a lot of reasons why the speed hump, if it was to be approved and is a tool for us to use, it's used in the right spot at the right time. And again, not that it's the last thing that we bring out, but it certainly should be something at the very end of our solution options because of all these potential cons. And so I think one of the biggest ones, the reason why I put it in red, reasons why I have the uniformed folks here today, is because this is usually the biggest sticking point for a program, and that's the emergency response time. And so maybe this is an opportunity, if you wanted to ask questions to either the police department or the fire department, this would be a great time, in my opinion, to have that conversation.
You know, in the fire department, one of the concerns that I have that I was looking at is, of course, the concerns that the fire department has is a response, a delay concerns. And the big one is a survival rate for cardiac arrest. And my understanding is it's around 50% CPR administered within 3 to 5 minutes. And if we have some obstructions to that we potentially can lose a life with that, or maybe save a life.
Yes, sir. So when we're talking about a speed hump, Steve McNaughton, Oxnard Fire Marshal. So when we start talking about speed humps and the speed hump program, and we're talking about using the engineered system and systems of 3, we're talking each hump is approximately 10 seconds to slow a response. So you're talking about a 30-second increase in response in just one lane. So that increases the time. Our goal is to have from time out of station to time on scene is 4 minutes. The reason for that is because of CPR response. When you hit, for every minute, you lose about 10% or survival rate. The same thing for the fire growth progression is for every 60 seconds, a fire doubles in size. So when you're talking about the initial phases of that, you're going to start talking about, yes, every 30 seconds, every minute is another 10%.
So if you have 3 humps, that multiplies it by 3 then.
Yes, sir.
Interesting. Okay.
So
Can I ask, Mr. Fire Marshal, can you also discuss the difference between the speed cushions with regard to fire trucks versus ambulances?
That was my next question.
So yeah, that's something that I learned as well. The difference between speed humps, speed tables, speed cushions. So if we can go back to
the
photos of the different devices. So there are different engineered devices. As you can see on slide or on the bottom left, that is a speed cushion where the entire length of the street is lifted.
Is that C?
That would be C, yes. And then you can see in picture B and picture D,
Do we have a
those
pointer?
are called speed cushions. And so what you have right there is a gap that straddles, that allows for larger vehicles not to have to slow down, or they don't have to ride that way.
Would that, excuse me, would that be the width of the axle of the truck?
Yes, so that
Okay.
would be the width of the axle of a large fire apparatus, such as a fire engine or fire truck. But what that doesn't include is the size of our ambulances or our quick response vehicles. So our ALS squad, our ALS ambulances, and BLS ambulances in the city, and the other quick response vehicles.
That
they would
equipment
have to
is,
slow
that
down.
equipment is impacted the most because of the width.
Yes, because
Okay.
they cannot, this is designed for larger vehicles. And if you design it for the smaller vehicles, it would not be able to work for traffic mitigation.
Mr. Michael enters.
Yes.
The chief or the fire marshal just pointed out what I was going to talk about, but maybe a little bit more detail. So the right pitches are the speed cushions. Again, they are separated apart. So the larger apparatus, like the fire trucks, the ones on the left, A and C, are traditional speed humps, or and also a combination of speed tables. The one thing the fire marshal mentioned is if we try to put on the right-hand side with a speed cushion, if we try to create a scenario where we have the gaps for the ambulances, it doesn't do any good because it's the same width as cars. So again, we're trying to address part of the issue with the response time, which is the large apparatus. But if we do it for the ambulances, basically it's no result from regular cars. And I also will mention that because fleet is also in public works, the amount of costs it is if a fire apparatus breaks a leaf spring or an alignment. I mean, one, they may not actually make it to the event because it breaks their leaf spring or part of their fire apparatus. But two, just the repair cost of that alone is tremendous. The amount of weight that those vehicles have is a lot.
So that's called the speed cushion then.
Yeah, so the ones on the right are speed cushions. The ones on the left are speed humps. And then another tool that we have is called a speed table. It's a little longer extended speed hump. You can imagine it's actually trapezoidal shape. So it's got a ramp up, a flat surface, and then a ramp down. You can see them sometimes on pedestrian crossings, mid-block crossings. Those are some examples of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, can we also have the police department address their issues?
Okay, thank you. But I'd like to deal with the fire. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. I have questions for you, please. You said 10% per minute, 10% in survivability is lost per minute of
Yeah,
delay.
That's
Okay.
the AHA guidelines.
I'll just share this with you. I had a wife that worked in cardiology, and there was, in the cardiology business, they have very certain, very blunt, black lines about who's going to make it and who's not. I had to use 911. And for anybody in the public that ever does that, there will come a time when you wonder in your mind, how long did it take them to get there? So I get a hold of the fire station and they played the time. They got there extremely quick, got there really good. The outcome was not good, but they got there on time. So you run these things through your mind. It's one thing to hear about them. It's one thing to live through it. The 40, if you want to get there within 4 minutes, that's still a 40% chance they may not make it, correct? Okay. The second thing is, with the majority of fire calls that we have for, say, you don't know when you get the call of the person's heart, or they need the fire truck, or they need the ambulance. We cannot at this time make a determination when we get a call if we're sending a fire truck, a big piece of equipment, or an ambulance. Is that correct?
So when you have an emergency response call, you minimum will get a fire engine and an ambulance response for transport.
And in my situation, the fire truck showed up a lot sooner than the ambulance, and they were
Yes.
waiting for the ambulance.
Yes.
So hats off to the Oxnard Fire Station. But I just wanted to, the majority of calls that we have are non-fire related, but we still need to send fire trucks to these sites.
Yes.
And there will be follow-up equipment, whether it's the larger size van or a standard size ambulance?
Yes, the closest vehicle or closest available resource will respond. And that generally is an engine company that is the closest available to respond. And that's why they are responding as well.
My experience with the Vineyard Fire Department, they did a slam bang, fantastic job. The trucks, the big trucks would be able to get there possibly if they were able to straddle the humps with no delay of 30 seconds per minute.
If you had speed cushions in play, then, and they straddled those, there should be a minimal delay in that response.
And if the smaller units came in, they would possibly have to have, if they had the speed cushions, they possibly would not be able to straddle, so they would still have to take a 30-second.
Yes, and so just to clarify, the majority of our fire response is a BLS response, and the ambulances are an ALS response. So our small equipment, our squad and ambulances are the ALS response the majority of the time.
And for the most part, the people that get there first, the firemen, in my experience, they knew what to do, and they're not just like guys waiting to put a fire out. They're not standing around waiting for somebody. No, they're trained, and and we're working to get more people. So they're basically quasi paramedics.
No, basic life support is EMT level, and paramedic level is advanced life support. There are skills that a paramedic can do that a basic life support EMT cannot.
Thank you for the correction. We'll probably have some more questions later.
Can I ask
But thank you
Yes,
very
sir.
much for me. Go ahead, Mayor.
So the MT is dispatched depending on the call, the type of call?
So all Oxnard firefighters are EMTs. And so some are paramedics, depending on their level of training and certification. So our standard response for an engine company is a EMT basic life support response.
Right.
We do have individuals that are trained as advanced life support, and our staffing for that is on our ALS squad and sometimes supplemented on engine companies. But when you're asking overall general response, it would be for an EMS call, it would be the closest apparatus, whether it be a truck or an engine, a ladder truck or an engine, and an ambulance. And so the ambulance would be that ALS response.
Great, thank you.
Again, thank you very much. I appreciate your information and sharing with the public.
No problem. And thank you.
And now the police chief is here. Do we have questions of the chief of any of these response
Yeah,
times,
Chief.
or does he want to add what the discussion has been?
Yeah, Chief, one of the bullet points that you have here is that there's potential delay in emergency responses. Or that, what would the humps or the speed devices cause the police department to delay?
Well, first of all, good morning, council members and members of the public watching. I'm Jason Benitez, the police chief. In terms of the impact on our emergency response equipment, it is less than that of the fire department, though it does still exist. So I would defer to using the fire department as being the more compelling of the two examples. So I'd see us as secondary to that.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to provide some perspective also to the presentation. Mentioned that there were 200 requests over the past 5 years for speed humps. To give you a sense of the bigger picture, the police department processes speed complaints to a rate several fold to what that number is. So the 200 is really a kind of a distilled number of requests of places where, a speed hump may be the solution, but it's not the only solution, because there are a number of other places that police resources need to cover to deal with speed complaints where a speed hump would not be an appropriate solution. For example, Victoria Avenue, Gonzalez Road, places where we need to provide enforcement. And anecdotally speaking, it seems like over the past maybe 2 years, the speed complaints have accelerated completely. It's speed and noisy vehicles are like the two main complaints that we get from our community. And we have a limited number of officers that are capable or allocated to conduct speed-related enforcement. So what that means is the less number of places where we can have to attend to with people and enforcement, the better. And so that's where we do find the value in speed humps, provided that they are properly placed in areas that qualify. So in other words, if we can put them in appropriate areas, we may not have to spend as much time enforcing in those particular zones.
So can I follow a quick question? Chief, then, for example, on that Kensha, the one that I brought up before, that would be more of a traffic concern than a speed hump concern?
I would say so, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So just depending on the placement of the intersection, how many vehicles travel through that location in a given day would be a factor that would determine that. But
Maybe.
generally in the residential neighborhoods is where we are getting the speed complaints, where we have tended to, we'll make an attempt to assess it with enforcement, speed surveys. And then if neither of those are effective, that's where we would be leaning towards deferring towards the speed hump. And that would really essentially turn it over to Public Works to make that determination.
Thank you, sir.
Chief, is there, as you mentioned, the concerns of speeding, is there a correlation with the calls that, or the 200 or so number that Mr. Wolf mentioned, of where these concerns are at, the speeding, and then where the requests are coming from?
I believe so. There could be some overlap. For example, say he had 200 requests over the past 5 years, we may have had, it's really nearly impossible for us to track the number, but just let me throw a number out there, 5 times that number. A portion of those may have been qualified that ended up amongst those 200.
Chief, with respect to those calls for speeding through neighborhoods, and when the investigations or your officers go out, are there many traffic tickets? Are you able to apprehend people and get them a traffic ticket?
Well, there are some factors that go into play, whether or not that particular street has a survey that allows us to do radar enforcement to enforce the speed. Otherwise, the traffic unit has to rely on other means like a pace, which is really a lot more difficult on a residential neighborhood versus a highway.
Can you run us through what's required to do a traffic survey or to set something up?
Yeah, let me, I'd like to actually hand this one over to Sergeant Jose Diaz. He's our traffic sergeant. He can give you the more technical aspects of that, and I can step right back up to the podium.
Because I personally think that there's probably as many people interested, and please come up, as many people interested about the people speeding through their neighborhoods and what happens when we catch them.
Would that just for information, Mr. Chair, would that be the eligibility criteria? Is that in that part of the presentation on page 17? No.
Yeah, we're getting into setting some of that criteria. So I believe Sergeant Diaz will talk about the question, which is the enforcement side of the house. We can get back to the eligibility criteria about the establishment of the speed, the number. So.
Thank you. Okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
Jose Diaz, Traffic Sergeant with Oxnard PD. I believe the question was, what were the process with doing speed enforcement and in light of a speed survey? So we work closely with the traffic engineer's office on trying to get the speed surveys. The reason why that's important for us in enforcement is because if we use any type of LiDAR or radar device, if we ultimately do enforcement on a vehicle, we have to prove to the court whether or not there was a traffic survey as required by the vehicle code. Without that, it's very difficult for us to do speed enforcement using those mechanisms.
Do we have more than one piece of equipment that can do that? I mean, as we're talking right now, is there a survey being run somewhere in the city that may have been generated by various complaints?
Actually, we just conducted a citywide survey. Numerous streets, if not all of them, were resurveyed. So that should give us another 5 years once that comes to council.
Okay, and you mentioned 5 years. I didn't even think of that. Once you take the survey, how good is it? Before the common term is how long before it goes stale?
So they can last upwards of 10 years. And that
Wow.
depends on a couple variables. And one of those variables obviously is like changes in the roadway, changes in volume, something significant that would change the survey to the current times.
And
No, go ahead.
I would like to know for myself, when we do the survey and we get the data and it'll stand up in court, how many times are we able to get various people tickets so that we basically teach the community that that's an area that they stay away from and speed? It's sort of like teaching a kid a lesson.
So there's some hotspots in Oxnard that are, I should say, very commonly abused for speed wise. However, when we look at the data and we're trying to find where the majority of our collisions are, those areas themselves present difficulties. Some of them are speed related, some of them are red light violations. So when we do conduct enforcement for speed, again, going back to those areas where we get a high amount of tickets, that may not be beneficial to the city because those aren't high collision areas that we're looking at. So again, we're trying to find those areas that we can focus on that are basically locations where people are getting hurt or dying.
Well, Officer Diaz, the speed monitors that we see out in the street, like Ventura Road, it says your speed is X when you're going by. How do we enforce that if it's the speed limit is 45 miles and I'm going 50 or 60? Does that record the data? What happens there?
So those specific speed monitors, yeah, those don't record. Those are one of our traffic calming devices. So let's say we had a driver
Okay.
that was going and they're just not paying attention. And let's say they're going 60 and a 45. They could see that and be like, oh, I'm going 60 miles per hour. And they themselves would slow it down. In regards to some of the other ones that we're trying to post up, there is no mechanism right now to be recording any type of the vehicles. I think we tried looking at speed cameras here in California before, and that obviously got shut down.
So that's basically telling people, hey, wait a minute, slow down. You're going,
Yes.
it's supposed to be 45, but you're going 55 or 60, slow down.
Yes.
Basically is what it, okay.
Mhm.
And that happens to me quite often. I don't go 60 and then 45.
Yeah.
But that's good. Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Diaz. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And if there's
Mhm.
public,
If we're sort of finished with the emergency response, there's still a couple other
right.
cons that I want to focus in on. If we could put that slide back up,
Mhm.
the slide that talks about the cons. And just for information, while that slide goes back up, we are bringing what's called our speed survey, as the Sergeant Diaz mentioned. That'll come to this committee in October. So we'll have a good chance to talk about how speed limits are set, how those get enforced. I think October 11th, the Public Works and Transportation Committee will see our citywide speed survey. So that'll be a good opportunity to have that conversation. So a couple of things I did want to point out. There are 3 or 4 bullets talk about dollars. So speed humps mean increased cost on a lot of things, right? Whether that's the installation of it, whether it's the cost of maintenance, recognizing that we have solid waste trucks that go over the top of those all the time, 3 times a day on your pickup day. And those are very large vehicles and with lots of mechanics, lots of things that can break, a lot of things that wear out. So there's not only a cost to individual property owners if they own a personal vehicle, but city will see some increased cost in terms of maintenance. But the 3 things that I thought were important to dive into, because the details aren't there, it's just kind of a generic conversation. We talked about drainage a little bit, but parking and street sweeping. And so we know there are a lot of places in Oxnard that have on-street parking issues. Speed humps aren't going to make that any better. In fact, potentially they have to make that worse, because depending on where that speed hump sits, from an engineering standpoint, it may preclude somebody from parking in a certain location or don't want to park in a certain location. So again, we hesitate to solve one problem and create another one. So again, this goes back to picking the right place to put these. This is not the solution every time. The other one is street sweeping. And so you can imagine a street sweeper is going down the street. If you've seen the operation of that, they have a curb broom, the circular rotating broom on the side, and then they have the brush in the back. Once that curb broom breaks away from the surface, it actually typically leaves debris behind. And so when that street sweeper goes over the speed hump, they're breaking that surface as they rock back and forth. So there are usually places where we have speed humps where we typically have debris left behind. And as you can imagine, the many miles of centerline miles that we have to sweep or curb miles we have to sweep, it's not always an opportunity for that driver to go back and sweep by hand every time they go over a speed hump. And so there are places where we have speed humps that sometimes we have debris issues that we have to address either on a quarterly or semi-annual basis. And it's not addressed by the weekly or biweekly street sweeping operation. So again, that's another con because it creates a different problem. The next two is about quality of life a little bit. And that is the folks that typically drive over speed humps are the people that live on the street, right? So in a place that's maybe not a cut through traffic issue, the people that are, I'll use this word loosely, impacted the most are the people who actually live on the street. And when we dive into the criteria and the process, we'll talk about a recommendation of why we want to have buy-in from the community, not just one person asking for speed humps. It's a community, it should be a community, in our opinion, a community-driven process. The other one is because we're putting speed humps on streets, on residential streets, typically we're putting it in front of somebody's home, two people's homes, right? Because they stretch across the street. Some people don't like that. Some people think that that potentially decreases the value of their home or otherwise precludes them from parking in front of their house, or they may now get debris in front of their home because the sweeper's not able to effectively sweep there. So again, quality of life issues, not just noise. The speed humps have to go in front of somebody's property. We're not going to put it in front of their driveway. We try to pick the property line so it kind of straddles different properties. But again, this idea that everybody wants them, I will say in my, going on 20 plus years, not everybody wants a speed hump because of all these reasons. And so these are things that we try to drive the process. So the process drives that out. So if we want a certain percentage of the residents on that street to agree to install it, it's because of these things, because of these potential negative impacts to the local residents. So those are the three things I wanted to point out on the con section, but you can see the rest of them. A lot of them are dollar issues. Some of them are potentially moving the problem someplace else. And again,
It's a biggie.
having done this many times, unfortunately, sometimes you're moving the problem into the next street over.
And Mr. Chair, and you're also going to share the cost to the city to implement the program, right?
We do have a suggestion, Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
in the latter part of the
Right.
of the presentation. And if we have questions on that, we can cover what would be a typical program that I've seen in the past.
Thank you.
Mr. Wolf, in your presentation on slide 7 of the PowerPoint, there was a comment about ADA impacts. Can you touch a little bit about that?
Mhm.
Right. So somebody who may have a medical issue, maybe a spinal injury that lives on that street and they have to go over those speed humps every day, that could make a problem for them, right? These aren't devices that are easily navigated, right? They do create some level of potential discomfort, if you will, in your vehicle on purpose, right? On purpose to slow down, right? But somebody who has a higher sensitivity to those kinds of things, it could be a huge issue. They live on the street, they bought their property on the street, and now after the fact, we potentially installed speed humps and they can have an issue with that.
And I think you touched on it perfectly. The people that will be requesting these speed bumps on a particular street, normally it's where they live. They definitely don't want it in front of their house. And also over time, the residents that are using the street as a shortcut will over time be trained that there's another way around.
Mhm.
And as the mayor mentioned on Kentia, that's
Mhm.
one of the things that goes on.
Mhm.
That in the past, with respect to how speed bumps were put in place, was there a policy or a practice in the city of Oxnard? And the reason for this meeting today is to come and create some new, so that we're not just shooting from the hip. Joe Blow comes in and asks for speed bumps, or Mary Martinez comes in and asks for speed bumps. She knows somebody on the council, she gets them, or he gets them. There's going to be a policy approved by the city council, hopefully going forward. And Mr. City Manager, can you help me out on that one?
I can't speak with in-depth knowledge about prior policies. I know there have been efforts at this, but what I do know is we don't have a policy in place today, which is why we're having this workshop and hopefully get to the community to give us some input as well. But we can get into what the criteria would be, and that would help.
That's right.
Okay.
Thank you. Mhm.
Okay. Can we get with the
That's-
criteria?
It's page 17.
Page 17.
Mhm.
Page 17, there's a
Yeah,
process, city staff and neighborhoods, eligibility criteria, minimum analysis, review and approval of the fire department.
mhm.
Yeah, we'll put up the presentation, maybe one more slide down right there. Again, we're talking about a program as a whole. We're not talking about specific locations, but a pretty standard process is sort of twofold. Well, actually technically threefold. One is the minimum criteria. So again, this is not the right solution in a lot of places. And so we want to establish some minimum criteria. Otherwise, we start seeing the impacts that the emergency responders have talked about. And so the issue here is to try to address it in the right area. So one of the minimum criteria that's typically established is a volume. So where we have a volume of at least 500, but no more than 2,000. And those numbers again come from our industry standard. And part of that is to try to provide resources in the right spot. That's one. The question, well, why limit it at 2,000? Why is that the case? Again, we're trying to make sure we're addressing residential locations and not places that have been designed for major traffic circulation. And so that's why we established this criteria. We also talk about, we want to make sure, again, we're not addressing arterial and collector streets. So we're talking about streets that are designated as a 25 mile an hour, whether that's by default, we call it prima facie, or whether that because of the type of street it is, residential, or whether it has a speed survey, as Sergeant Diaz had mentioned, up to 30. So we're looking at streets that are 25 or 30, again, avoiding the streets that are used by our responders and our public to circulate the city. So we're not looking at streets that are major circulation elements.
And Michael, the 500 to 2,000 could be the neighbor using the street 34 times a day or something like that.
Correct. So we just, I mean, the typical process would be we'd set out the the traffic data collection tubes. You've probably seen
Right.
the black
Right,
tubes
yeah.
that go across the street. That's the typical process. And so we don't discern if you forgot, as I do on the weekend, I have to go to Home Depot 50 times because I've forgotten the thing I needed every time, right? They don't count me as one, they count me as 50. So yes.
Right, because I don't, people think there's 2,000 cars going through the neighborhood. Well, but this is traffic, actually, the data that in and out from the house or going to the store or picking up the kids or whatever, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not by vehicle. It's a
By trip.
rudimentary count. If you went over it, I'm counting you as one. If you come back, I'm counting you as two.
Thank you.
The other part is that we talked about that minimum street length. Again, this goes back to the engineering perspective of this. This is a very engineering process. I think some people may not understand that there's a lot of science, a lot of engineering that goes into this, and a lot of studies that have been done. The speed humps have been around for a long, long time, and a lot of studies. And so we're trying to create an engineering solution rather than a knee-jerk reaction that actually is not helping the situation or potentially creating a bigger issue. So when we talk about that, we talk about deploying them in groups of 3 because of the results we get with that. And that usually means that we need some distance to have that group of 3. So we're looking at streets that are at least 1,000 feet long. So not cul-de-sac streets, not smaller interior residential streets. We're looking at streets that are at least 1,000 feet long so that we can get that result. We can space out those speed humps in such a fashion that it actually drives the result. Otherwise, either put them too close together or you only have 1 or 2, you actually don't solve the problem. You actually create a bigger problem. So that's the minimum criteria. And that's just kind of getting you into the door. If you meet that criteria, then we will do if requested, somebody from the street. It can't be somebody down the block. It can't be, your friend. It needs to be somebody who actually resides on the street, submits an application. We check the minimum criteria. And if it meets the minimum criteria, we go to the next step. And that next step is the analysis step.
Before you get there, with respect to the 1,000-foot street, a minimum of 1,000 feet, it's a little less than a quarter of a mile, but how many blocks is 1,000 feet?
Yeah, we don't, a block is not a unit of measurement that we use. And so I can't make that Correlation.
Normally, what
Okay.
15 is a mile, normally then, that many.
If the street, 1,000-foot length street, is it a straight street? Will curved streets count? It's irrelevant whether there's curved streets or not?
That's irrelevant. In fact, curved streets typically is actually changing and deflecting the straight line is actually a traffic calming measure that we use. So curved streets typically don't have as high a speed because of that.
Okay, thank you.
The next one is the analysis section. And we have to draw the line somewhere, right? So we were drawing the line and we're using the same criteria that we would use when we do what the California Vehicle Code requires us to do when we establish speed limits. And that's called the 85th percentile. And it's a very complex, but the easiest way to do it is to think about is 85% of the people that we have seen go down the street are doing a certain speed or below, right? And so this is how we want to establish a criteria or analysis. So we'll go out, put the tubes out 24 hours or 48 hours, Kumar, I can't remember. 24 hours, we'll have those tubes out there measuring all the traffic and whatnot that goes by there. We look at it, and if the 85th percentile of that is 9 miles an hour over the posted speed limit or more, that meets the analysis criteria. So that's the analysis side. And then we will once that, let's assume it's meets the minimum criteria, it meets the analysis criteria. Now we're going to the sort of the go, no go decision, which is police and fire. So now we want police and fire to say, you know what, this is on the very edge of our response time, and any more time would be detrimental to their mission. Or no, you know what, this is a place that we can address a potential delay, and so go ahead and move forward. So that's that go no go decision. We typically meet with them. It's not hard and fast. We try to come up with solutions, and the engineering world has reacted to this situation in the last 15 years by the speed cushions. Before that wasn't a thing when I first started doing this. Speed tables weren't really a thing. And so we've as engineers adapted to this process by trying to create some of those solutions that address this. So we'll work with the police and fire to try to provide a solution that fits everything. But that's that last sort of analysis part would be fire and police weighing in.
But Mr. Chairman, I also noticed in your report that you also work with other departments like the street department and the ER department. And of course, the public safety departments are really important. So there's about 4 or 5 other departments that you work with also in that criteria. Is that correct?
Right. So I take off my transportation engineering hat and I put on my ER hat because they're in my same department, or I put on my streets hat. So yes, we certainly don't want to create another issue for another division in public works, because then I just have to solve that one separately, right? So yes, so we want to make sure that the streets division, who's going to maintain them, understands. Maybe they give them some input like, hey, by the way, that's a place where we have a lot of flooding, right? We want to hear that. Or ER may say, you know what, if you just moved it X number of feet, because this is where the person typically puts their trash can or whatever, we want to hear that.
And the trucks going over those humps too, the big old 50,000-pound trucks, so.
Right. They're very, very heavy, as you can imagine. And again, those are all mechanical, electrical parts that over time, even just routinely driving them down the street, they wear out. Now I think about putting that over a speed hump, right? Creating that jolting or otherwise change in vertical deflection, that puts more wear and tear on those mechanical devices.
And cost.
And significantly more cost. Like I said, leaf springs on fire trucks and leaf springs, if they do have them on the ER, some of the ER trucks, they're very expensive, very expensive.
Thank you.
If you don't mind,
one question, Mr. Wolf. You mentioned that under the analysis, would do the analysis. If we find that there are times that there are areas of question, we then go to the fire department to find out if these particular areas are going to decrease the response times. Does the fire department, Mr. McNaughton, does the fire department know what the response times are in various areas of our city well enough to be able to fill that blank in for the public works?
The fire department works with city GIS and county GIS to establish all their response criteria that we have within the city. So we know from the station to a destination, what the expected travel distance is. So again, our goal is to have ALS response on scene within 5 minutes and have our response on scene within 4 minutes from the travel time. We're working to grow our ALS program because it came into conception a few years ago so that we can have a mixed response. But our current criteria, and we track it through GIS and through city and response data to be able to tell the time frame from the station locations to the areas in question.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Mr. Don.
No problem.
And I'd just like to say, as you're going back, ladies and gentlemen, just like a public service message here. When you hear lights and sirens, every 10 seconds that the guy's late, every minute the person is late, 10% chance less of survivability, what they're going to. So get the hell out of the way when you hear lights and sirens coming. Please.
So committee members, I talked a little bit about or detailed about the internal process. If you have questions, the next slide, we can talk about the external process.
Neighborhood petitions, ranking and prioritization. We don't have a policy in place. The city manager said at one time when I was a member of the public, that we were told that a certain number of citizens on the street would sign up, get a petition, they would do it. What is the neighborhood petition indication on slide number 9? Neighborhood petition signed by 2/3 of the residents on that street, whether they're tenants and owners.
So this goes back to making sure that one person is not driving the request because of the potential impacts or cons to the entire street. And so pretty typical process in other agencies I've worked for and other agencies I've reviewed. We're looking for buy-in by the community because they obviously will be driving on it every day. And so I did find a document, I think it was from 2007 City of Oxnard document. And it said that at that time was 70% was the number requested of signatures to agree with the speed hump installation. We are recommending a pretty standard 2/3 that the designated residents, whether that's the owner or the tenant, we would define, let's say we pick street X and there are 50 properties on street X. We will list those 50 property addresses down so that those are the signatures that we're looking for. We need 2/3 of those 50 in order for us to say that this is something that the community, the neighborhood, the street wants. And so that's that external process. We hand that over to whoever is the champion of the request and say, please go get 2/3 signature and return it back to us.
Mr. Chairman, question that I've received in the past, especially when we had the Bartola Square study back at that time, was that, for example, we had the 70%, and there was an individual in the middle of the block that was disabled. They didn't have an opportunity to really get off from the curb, safely and so forth. And they were asking for an exception to a curb cut. Was there any such an exception for that? From the 70% or the 2/3?
We are not building in any exceptions in our speed hump program. That's not the staff's recommendation. Again, because of the totality of the potential impacts, we want to make sure at least 2/3 of the folks that will be dealing with this on a day-to-day basis say yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And curb cuts are a totally different subject, right?
Right.
But
I just
point, because I do remember that discussion. Councilman Lopez.
Chair, I wonder if maybe we're at a point where we can take some public comment before we go into the details of the program and what the recommendation might be. Just looking at the
cost.
time, and I think the public's been very patient. I really appreciate it. So wonder if we can maybe.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Was there anything that you
On the cost?
that you would like to add before we open it up? And
Uh,
we will have an opportunity to ask questions after
Not,
comments?
nothing that's not already written in the staff report and the presentation. I think that provides a lot of the good overview of the recommended program. Again, this is a workshop, so looking for input on any of those and suggestions that we have.
Okay. Okay, we have 5 public comment speakers. And as I mentioned, we had several letters sent in. Assistant City Clerk Lee, can you tell us the number of letters that were sent in and the flavor for or against?
Yes, Chair Morello, there were 13 letters that came in and 12 were support and 1 was against. And these public written comments will be posted on our city website.
Thank you very much. And they will be incorporated into this presentation, correct?
No, I don't have, but I can get it.
Okay.
They'll be published when this moves forward to council.
They will.
All right. The first speaker I have is Sandy Rias, R-I-A-S. I hope I pronounced it right. And thank you very much for coming to the meeting.
No, thank you, Mayor, and I do appreciate this very much. My name is Sandy Diaz. I'm a resident of Oxnard. I live on the corner of Vanderbilt and Villanova. But first of all, I really want to thank the police department and the fire department and yourself, sir. You really have pointed out some very important concepts here, because my first line is it's important for the residents of the city that the overall safety and integrity of their neighborhoods are maintained. And then could speed humps be a potential option to help manage traffic through our local streets? After hearing some of the cons and hearing police department and fire department, well, I'm not sure now. But I'll go to my third bullet is the city investigating and considering other technologies and solutions for implementation in neighborhoods that might not meet the standards for these speed humps as defined by the city, but traffic violations still occur. And I'm hearing in all over Oxnard, especially in my street, speeders, people ignore the stop sign. I live on the corner of Villanova and Vanderbilt. It's a 4-way stop. I have a porch which I go out and sit. I can count, the 30 minutes that I'm sitting out there, there might be 2 people who actually do a complete stop. So I'm feeling that the problem is the drivers. I think we have very poor drivers out there, inconsiderate drivers, especially through our neighborhoods. And I live in a typical neighborhood. People are walking, the pets, their young kids. We have older people walking, and it's, I guess it's just a danger. And lastly, while it's understood that maybe some streets may not be eligible for these speed humps or speed cushions or whatever, it is hoped that maybe the city can rely on roundabouts, traffic circles. I'm not sure if that's a solution perhaps, but we have called the police department and they're always there. They have we have had the police be at a corner there, and people suddenly turn into very good drivers because they see the police there. They leave and when
30 seconds.
As I'm sitting on my porch, they're back at it. Just the people who violate a stop sign. So, but I really thank everyone involved and the information on speed humps. It was very informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Cindy Hoekstra.
Morning, Mayor Zargos and members of committee. My name is Cindy Hoekstra, and I am here representing the street of Glenwood or Glenwood neighborhood. Not to talk about specific streets, but I can say that this was a very detailed presentation, which I was very happy to see. But I'd like to know more about exactly what the lady prior to me said. What are the options available for neighborhood residential streets that are not eligible for the humps, bumps, or cushions? And, or they're a specialized street category, like an arterial type street. What are the options available for them as far as addressing the speeding issues and the other problems that come with it? I understand both sides of the public safety, police and fire, and their concerns and their legitimate concerns for the residents that live on Glenwood as well. But we also want a safe street. And so we have to somehow find a way to make the residential streets safer with the limited public safety resources we have to address it. So we have to come up with some better options, some additional options, which I really didn't see in this particular presentation. So I'd like to hear more about that. And then just one comment. I did look at this notice for this meeting online, and I read it again sitting here. And being not totally familiar with Measure M, there's nothing on here that says that the presentation will not be given at the meeting. So maybe at the end of where they talk about the Measure M, that you could add a sentence that says the presentation will not be given at the meeting. So therefore we know it's not to expect it, because I came here expecting it. I didn't know it wasn't going to be given.
It's, if I can we have the city attorney address that with respect to?
Yeah, thank you.
We'll definitely look into your comment because it is a good one. Measure M passed, I believe, last year, and it 2020, I'm sorry, and it prohibits the city from giving presentations here at council. So what happens is council asks questions. So once that is invalidated, then we can go back to having presentations here. But I think your suggestion is good and we'll look into it.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with that particular, Measure M detail. And so I came here thinking I could see it, and then I didn't realize that I couldn't. So thank you.
Confusion.
Yeah.
I don't think the voters realized it either.
Thank
Okay.
you, Cindy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. The next speaker, Miguel Fernandez, please.
Good morning, everyone. And I just want to thank you all, Mr. Mayor, council members, city staff, public safety department, for bringing this issue up, because I was actually surprised when I saw the notification that it was going to happen. I think it's a great idea to at least have the discussion and do an analysis and figure out what the best ways are to go. I know there's the pros and cons. I personally would be in favor of doing speed humps in the right locations. I happen to live in the Strawberry Fields neighborhood, very close to Devonshire, just west of Ventura Road. And Devonshire is pretty much a drag strip, a thoroughfare that connects the older neighborhoods that are to the west of Strawberry Fields to Ventura Road. And the Strawberry Fields tract becomes this kind of bridge between Ventura Road and the older neighborhoods that before Strawberry Fields was built and it was just farmland, those neighborhoods were forced to go to Gonzales to be able to make their way to Ventura Road, or maybe even Doris. I don't quite remember for sure the connection. But I think that Devonshire would be a very good candidate possibly for speed humps. And I had a couple of thoughts. Maybe you could coincide a speed hump with a location where there's a fire hydrant. If it's not at the corner, if it's down mid-block, so that you can't park at the fire hydrant anyway. So now all of a sudden, at least on one side of the street, you've got a situation where a speed hump doesn't affect parking. I was hoping that we could get speed humps, like about 50 of them in front of my house. But when you go westbound on Devonshire, just from Ventura Road, and then you turn right on Oxford, people turn that corner very fast, and then they turn left either on Natalie or on Oneida, which Oxford tees into. And they're on their way to the older neighborhoods to the northwest of my neighborhood. And I was hoping that I would win the lottery so I could pay for other type of traffic calming methods like bulb outs and things like that. Maybe stick a little tree in the middle of the intersection and put a little fence around it or something. But I just want to thank you again for bringing the issue up. Let's let's talk about it. Let's do the smart thing about how to implement these issues or these solutions. And I'm all for it. Thank you very much.
You know, the demonstrator might be good for roundabouts too, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Mr. Hernandez. The next speaker is Mr. Steve Nash.
Thank you, Chair Perrello, committee members. I want to speak specifically on the downtown core. First, let me preface my comments by saying Measure M is an absolute travesty that has reduced civic engagement to near zero. At our planning commission meeting, we talked about the housing element. We had one member of the public there, and she was an advocate for affordable housing. So we need to get rid of that any way we can. Public Works has their agenda. That's to ensure the smooth and efficient moving of vehicles. That's one of their priorities. Public safety, they have to, they want to remove any hindrance that reduces response time. That's great. Our council, however, they have to deal with the larger issue of, ensuring the safety of pedestrians. That is just non-negotiable. And also to find a way to activate our downtown. And you do that by encouraging pedestrian foot traffic. Right now, you cannot, people might come to downtown, they'll park their car, go to a restaurant and then leave. But you want people to come downtown and actually spend time, go to a restaurant, go to a show, get an ice cream cone, whatever. But right now, you take your life into your own hands when you cross any of the streets in the downtown. I know I certainly do as a slow old guy. My head has to be on a swivel because I cannot trust cars. My life is in danger. And especially when you look at 7th Street, I thought about what happened to Carmen a lot, and it happened in broad daylight, perfect weather. And yet somehow she was struck by a vehicle. And the type of vehicle certainly played a role because these high profile vehicles, a smaller person, a woman, a child, they get lost because if they're in the crosswalk, they get lost because the vehicle sits so high. So I will accept speed bumps as a temporary measure, but I think all of the intersections in the downtown should be signalized. Find ways to prevent people from using the east-west streets to get from Oxnard Boulevard to Ventura Road. So there are a couple of things we can do. We can light up the crosswalks like they do in Ventura. But number one, we have to find a way to protect our pedestrians, because right now, one additional death is one too many. And it's up to you to find a way. So good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Nash.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Byron Toledo. And if I pronounce it wrong, Brian Toledano.
I think,
Chair Perrello, I think he left.
yeah, I saw with a little baby.
All right. I'd just like to share for the public, the last two speakers were members of City CAGs, Planning Commission, and Parks and Rec. I want to thank them for their service to the city.
No Zoom.
Oh,
I don't think.
Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers on the call in?
Chair Perrello, we don't have any additional speakers on this item.
Okay. Guess we'll go to the discussion part. We have the analysis. You've heard the speaker's comments. One of the comments that I take to heart, they've identified the streets, and I know the neighborhoods are talking about. Is there an option for a neighborhood that does not qualify for the speed bumps, whether they don't have the traffic or they don't have the length of the street? I think it would need to be, from my mind, to be presented what it is that their biggest concern is. If it is people running stop signs, that's something that speed bumps are not going to stop. You're gonna have to get somebody, the gentleman and gentlelady in blue is gonna have to step in. Any comments on the public comments?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one correction I want to make for myself. I kept saying International Transportation Engineers. It's Institute of Transportation Engineers. So because this is a speed hump program discussion, I didn't talk a lot about the other things that we use. And so there are, and actually, it's actually point number one of our very first slide, one of many traffic calming tools. So we do have many traffic calming tools, and a couple of the speakers mentioned some that I really am an advocate of, and those are roundabouts and bulb outs. We have lane diets and road diets where we remove lanes or otherwise narrow lanes, radar feedback signs. There are a multitude of different engineering devices, but I will also say that engineering is one of the 3 E's. So when we talk in our world, specifically for transportation, we talk about the 3 E's. That's education or enforcement, education, engineering. So all we really talked about today is the engineering side of the house. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, because of the comments, about some of the other things. Enforcement, obviously a very easily understandable idea, right? So that's whether that's traditional enforcement, police officers present, or automated enforcement where that's allowed. And as you heard, the chief, that's a resource discussion as well. The other part that I think gets skipped a lot is the education part of it. I bet you if we looked, we can find studies that most of those speeders are your neighbors. So do you have a neighborhood watch program? Are you
That's it. Bingo.
Are you doing something with your neighborhood? Are you having a conversation with your neighbors? So that I think we are missing that education program. And we do that sometimes. We have tools ourselves for that. We do temporary speed trailers. You've seen them. We parked them on the side of the street. Again, that's just that giving somebody a feedback on, oh, I am traveling faster than I anticipated. So it helps in those scenarios, but people who want to speed, that doesn't help. But public awareness programs, neighborhood watch programs, HOAs putting out in their newsletters, neighborhood councils talking about this, those are opportunities I think we're missing. The other thing that other agencies have is the pace setting program, where neighbors pledge to drive the speed limit. They sign a contract and say, I pledge to do the speed limit. This is for them and their neighbors. You know, not that it's peer pressure, but it certainly establishes a criteria of, I want to be safe in my neighborhood. Shouldn't you want the same? And so that's the other E that I think a lot of our public can take upon themselves if they wanted to, and really look at programs that have been successful in other neighborhoods that have been grassroots programs that help in these scenarios. But speed humps are only, again, as I mentioned, one of the tools, and in my opinion, usually the last tool in our toolbox where we want to address this. So whether we can do it by pavement markings, signage, hard construction, bulb outs, roundabouts, those are costly things, but those certainly have a different result depending on the scenario. So that would be my comments back on some of the public comments.
One question, a member of the public asked a question about fire hydrant and speed bump. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Can you address that?
If we were lucky enough to find a fire hydrant that matched the location that we would recommend, we would certainly put it there. But I would have that conversation with the fire chief or fire marshal and say, is that going to actually hinder your response? Are you going to want to sit that truck on a tilt right next to the fire hydrant? I don't know what their answer would be. I would certainly want to know what that answer is. So if by luck of the draw, if that's the case, again, we are looking at this from an engineering standpoint. If you put speed humps too close together, you're missing, if you put 50 of them, I think the request was, in front of the house, what's the rest of the street doing? So they're going to slow down right in front of that person's house.
That's right.
But to make up that time, and they know there's no more speed humps to the end, they're not doing 35 or 40 anymore. They're going to still make up that time. So I think if we're lucky enough, that makes sense. I would want to talk to the fire chief about that.
Okay, Thank you. We've gotten two more public speaker cards. The first one is Rylene Entreveros, please. Can you pull the speaker, pull it down? Thank you.
Live on Iron Bark in front of a school, and we don't have speed bumps, and I've seen
Can-
so many.
What, can I please ask, what school are you talking about?
Sarah Linda School. I'm right in front of Sarah Linda School, and I'm a resident in front of the school as well.
Thank you.
And I've seen several accidents, and a lot of people don't respect the time that the kids are coming out. And I would think that with bumps, maybe we can slow it down. And I just think maybe we can just do it from Glodota to Indigo, just where the school's at. But I didn't think into consideration everything else. So that was just my opinion, just to slow down before there's really a bad accident, because I have seen, kids riding a motorcycle, running into a car from looking back. It was just, stuff like that, before it gets to be deadly. But, so that was just my opinion, my thought.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
for sharing with us. Thank you very much for sharing. The next speaker is Tony Hernandez. And if I mispronounce it, I apologize.
That's okay. It's Hernandez. My name is Tony Hernandez, and I am a resident on Fournier Street. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it is the street that connects perpendicular between Channel Islands and La Cañada. And this street serves as a major corridor for traffic for the community that lives on the south side of La Cañada. And it is a very busy street. It's a residential street. And it's the street that's right behind Larson School Elementary. And the intersection of Fournier and Sequoia serves as a very busy corridor for kids, both during school hours and after school. Children ride their bikes and play on that intersection around that area. And so it is very dangerous. I've seen cars on a regular basis, especially in the morning and late in the evening when everybody's going to work or coming back from work, an excess of over 50 miles per hour. The intersection is definitely one where the four-way stop sign has absolutely no effect. And we've called Oxnard Police Department to place an officer in intersection, but that is a temporary solution to a long-term problem. As far as speed bumps is concerned, it's something that we have asked about. I personally did not know about this meeting, so I would come with you with more data. But in the time that I've been living there, it's been some 30-some years, I've seen an increased number of cars that have placed people in danger. And that's, like I said, pedestrians, people that also use that street to navigate and commute up and down the street. I'm sure that a lot of the people in the city have the similar problems. I've heard some of the speakers already, and I can totally relate with them. But I can only speak about my street where I live. In the time that I've been there, I've seen a number of accidents take place. Some have been very, very close and very bad. And thank God there have been no fatalities and nothing other than property damage has occurred. And all it takes is just one car out of control, one person speeding to make a bad situation tragic. The people that I typically find are the people that live, like I said, south of La Cañada. When they speed up and down that street, they know there are no officers at that intersection of Cloyne, which is the only street that intersects Fournier. So as they approach speeding up to that, they look into the sides, left, right, there's no police officer. They will not stop at that intersection. This street is perfectly smooth. And I don't know what the distance is between Channel Islands and La Cañada, but it's basically your quarter-mile speedway. So I appreciate the time, and I just want to bring concern to that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing. And I want to share with you. You live in the South Winds neighborhood, Fournier Street?
Fournier, up over by.
It's Fournier Street?
Yes, the intersection of Fournier Street and Sequoia,
by
right in the
by
center
the
of Fournier
railroad
Street.
tracks. But
The gentleman that got me involved in this stuff was named Ventura Fernandez. He lived in Fournier Street. And it was a long, long time ago. And I can tell you that then and now, there were people that did not pay attention, especially as you described, kids playing in the sidewalk and they'll use the street and that happened. And I can't blame the police department because you're 100% right. When the police show up, everybody's straight arrow and nobody makes a mistake, but they know that the police cannot stay there 24/7.
Like I said, I didn't hear about this meeting until very last minute. I would have brought in some kind of data in with you. But when I heard specifically that it was about speed bumps, this was a red flag and I knew I had to be here. The very last thing I want to say, and I know this is out of time, we can't put speed bumps on every street. It'd be very nice if we could. If I can only speak about my street, my conditions, what I'm having to deal with. And I would totally welcome a speed bump right smack in front of my house. And I would say minimum, if you put in five speed bumps, perfectly spaced throughout between that, would be an incredible deterrent for the traffic in my street.
Thank you.
Hopefully,
Thank you. Thank you very much for the offer. And Public Works is making note of that.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to share with all the speakers and everybody in the public. I did check. Every neighborhood council was contacted about this meeting and they had the opportunity to show up. Every neighborhood council and their executive boards. That's the last of my public speakers, unless somebody else is called in.
No other speakers.
Chair Perrello, no additional speakers at this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lyles.
So I have some recommendations, Mr. Chair, if we're there.
Do we?
Or do we have any additional?
Any additional, or do you want to touch base on the costs? And because I think the cost is something that the public needs to know. And we also understand that there's no way you can replace a life lost. So that when you say that right up front.
And I think, can I share, Mr. Hernandez, that your street runs all the way to Yucca Street? Yeah, from Channel Islands all the way to Yucca Street, yeah. It curves right, I know exactly, because that's a straightaway a street, you know. The roundabouts would be a good one for that one too, just for information. I'm not the engineer, but thank you.
Are there questions from the committee on slide 19 about the funding recommendations?
With respect to the design and construction, $25,000, and it is an asterisk, that's 2022 costs. Just to share with the public, I'm not complaining about the cost up or down, but just to share with the public how prices have risen in the last 24 months.
Yeah, so we wanted to make sure if we were putting numbers out, that we are caveating that with what we know today. We bid a lot of projects. We have multiple $1 million projects out to bid in construction. And we keep track of that information as closely as possible because it matters to us that we're seeing an increase in a lot of things, construction, not just labor, but hard construction, concrete, asphalt. You just think about traffic signal poles are made out of certain type of material. All those materials are going up, all the electronics that go with it. So we're seeing quite a bit of increases, unfortunately, in the cost of goods. And the other thing that we're seeing, unfortunately, is the delay in the supply chain. And so we have traffic signal poles that are 30 weeks, 40 weeks out. I mean, we're talking about almost a whole year to manufacture, ship, and install things. So because of that uncertainty of the supply chain, what contractors see, they don't want to build in a negative into their bid. So they have to anticipate that. So it just increases the cost all around. So yes, we have seen an increased cost. So the $25,000 that we're suggesting is an estimate for 3 speed humps in today's dollars.
And
just
and the other part is we're talking about the funds from council districts. Roughly the idea here is it would come from the general fund. It would be $50,000 as according to the staff report for those that get a chance. And staff report is still available online, people. $50,000 per district. Per district, we're talking council districts. Six council districts.
That's correct.
And that is 1 or 2 locations per year would equal about $300,000 cost to the city of Oxnard.
Right. We're suggesting to fund it by districts, obviously to create a level equity across the city. If you did 2 locations per year, that would be about $50,000 in today's dollars times 6 districts. So that just is a math. We're just putting the math on the paper. That would be $300,000 if we were looking at a program going forward.
And the last point on this particular slide 19, private funding.
It's a,
We did have a tremendous offer if the individual wins a lottery by Mr. Fernandez. But the recommendation is not to take private funding. Can you please explain that?
that's really
And
important.
Mr. Fernandez, that's a tremendous offer.
I actually wrote his name down and put an asterisk next to his name. I will follow up on that. Yeah, so I have come from other agencies, our traffic managers come from other agencies where this is allowed. We sat down and talked about this. Does it fit for Oxnard? And we don't recommend it fits for Oxnard. There are places where this maybe makes sense. But we want to make sure that this is a data-driven process, that we're trying to get, these are safety items that we're talking about, and whether or not you have funding, private funding, we didn't think that would make sense. So we're not recommending an opportunity for private funding unless he wins the lottery.
And Mr. Chair, before you leave that, I've been in other agencies where they do have costs for the residents, they vote for it and they get assessed a fee for that. But I think one of the important things is this can create an equity issue, which I think is really important, that we treat everybody the same, which is really, really important, for that. I think that statement is really important.
So that the equity that we're installing or recommending in the program is sweat equity. We want, this is somebody going door to door, talking to their neighbors, getting signatures. And so that means a lot, and taking time to do that. I believe that's the right process, instead of if somebody has money to get speed humps over
Thank you.
somebody else.
If I can extrapolate on that, it may not be the best example, but if we just take a look at the number of people in the audience that are not city employees, you're representing almost 250,000 people in the city, and it matters. But if we were to have a certain neighborhood that had the wherewithal to pay all the speed bumps in their neighborhood, there would be a perception, which sometimes still lingers in this city, that certain areas are treated differently than others. And I support not, and Mr. Fernandez, if you win the lottery, I may change my mind, but I support not taking that. But I think that the private funding issue not recommended by staff, I think is a good idea, just as why he's explained. Any further comments?
I have some recommendations if you're ready. Thank you. I first of all want to thank our staff, thank our public works director, our chief of police, and our fire department, and all the speakers that spoke today, because I think it's really important that we take into consideration, to consider the speed bump program here for the city of Oxnard. And one of the things that you mentioned to Mr. Public Director is what can we do and what can we not do, which I think is important that people understand that. And also the pros and the cons, the reduce vehicular speeds and certain types of collisions, and the cut through. I didn't really know what that was, but that's important to understand. And of course, the concerns from the fire department. So my recommendation, Mr. Chair, is that we allow the speed humps for residential streets that qualify for the program for the speed bumps. Taking into consideration the data that Public Works, the engineers put together, they outline by staff. Does that neighborhood qualify? Does the street qualify? Is it 1,000 foot? Can we put 3 humps? And also taking into consideration the Oxnard Police Department and Fire Department concerns and recommendations. For example, we don't want anybody to get, somebody's having a heart attack or a stroke, and we don't want those fire department or the EMT folks to get there 2 or 3 minutes or 1 minute later that can save somebody's life. So I think that's important to do. The thing that's really important too, that I saw, that it's not going to cost those individuals specific dollars right off, which we just talked about. And again, this, I think it's important that we recommend to the entire city council, Mr. Chair, that we look at that, approving those items per staff, per fire department, per the concerns that we've had from our speakers today, of course, this, as the city manager probably is thinking right now, with potential funding in the future, which I think is extremely important for all of us. So thank you for that. And thank you again for all the speakers today to be here today, especially on a Saturday, and especially on a nice Saturday today. So, but that's important that we take that into consideration. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If that's a form of a motion, I'll
It's a
second
motion.
that, but I'd also like to second it in form of discussion here. With some comments that I've made today, it sounds like I could be speaking out of both sides of my mouth, supporting speed bumps, but wanting to make sure the fire department response time is adequate as it can be. And I'm going to read directly out of the staff report. Page 21 from the fire department. The survival rate for cardiac arrest is estimated to be around 50% when the CPR is administered within 3 to 5 minutes. However, this survival decreases by 7 to 10% with each minute the defibrillator is delayed. I saw this work and I can tell you I don't ever want to see it again, but I really feel for the people in public safety that had to see this. I really feel this guy's job, he's got to see it, I got to see it, they see the best and the worst. But by the same token, I know what happens when people run red lights and they race through neighborhoods, and someone has mentioned a quarter mile, like a drag strip. There's got to be something change in the city of Oxnard, and I think the speed bump program would benefit, but it will be in working, I promise you, firemen, they'll be working with the fire department because public safety matters. Also with that, public safety with the police department. I know that we have to live within a budget. And I wish that we had a cop to nail every red light runner. Coming to this meeting, 2 people, they race the yellow light, but they cross the intersection before they cross this pedestrian walk before the intersection when the yellow went to red. And there was no way they could have stopped. They were going so fast. 2 of them, 2 different intersections. So it's some might say a cultural thing about Oxnard. Some might say it's just people take chances, high risk society, whatever. There's got to be something done. And when they get caught, it can't be in a minimal, it's got to have some teeth. And if it's for changing the rules, it's got to be done because we have a high number of people that are killed, pedestrians, not just elected officials. Joe Blow, citizen Juan Martinez, pedestrians, bicycle riders, people riding to work in the dark. We're coming to the time of year when the weather changes, they get hit. Sometimes the people that hit them stop. Sometimes they don't. It's a high risk city in some aspects to live in Oxnard. And I believe this will help. But as again, it sounds like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth on this one. I'm not. Do you have any comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I too support this being or going to the council completely to take action. I've certainly been one of the council members who has heard concerns from more than one neighborhood on the issues with speeding. And I agree that no life should be, should be taken in that manner because we haven't taken the appropriate action to protect the neighborhoods. And in the recommendation to establish this policy and the program within the city, I think it is valuable to look at and perhaps include some of those alternative options like the roundabouts where possible. I understand that may not be fitting in certain streets that are more narrow, where we have seen some of those concerns as one of the speakers mentioned. But I also think it is valuable to do a comprehensive program that also, as you mentioned, Mr. Wolf, includes the education piece of it and bringing that consciousness to drivers and residents within their neighborhood. We're all in this together, and it doesn't just fall on the city, but also residents themselves to take responsibility for their actions as drivers out there. So with that, thank you to everyone that was involved in bringing this forward, the police department, fire department, Public Works, and then the entire public for coming in and voicing your concerns, and hopefully we have more involvement at the council meeting when it does come forward.
Thank you.
Before we take a vote, the city manager would you like to say something?
Can I say one thing before? In my motion, I'd like to add, I think that Mr. Steve Nash mentioned something important, but looking at the intersections in downtown Oxnard, and potentially, we were looking at what happened over on 7th Street, but in the whole comprehensive report, Mr. Wolf, I think we should look at downtown too. Thank you.
Yeah, very quickly, that's, Mr. Mayor, that's a very separate issue. We can bring that
Understand.
separately.
Understand.
Yeah. So I just wanted to thank everyone who participated. First, the folks, I think we had about 13 comments that were emailed to the city clerk's office, and then everyone who came today really helps us. I mean, the reason we hold this workshop is to have this discussion. So your comments today and your questions will be incorporated into this report as it moves to the city council, along with the committee's recommendations. I do want to remind you, though, we're going to come to the city council hopefully in October with this report, but we can't make a presentation there either. But since you've participated, I beg you to come to that council meeting to help move the conversation along so that the broader public can understand what we're trying to discuss here. That would be very helpful, but we will certainly incorporate your questions and your ideas into this staff report as it moves to the city council. Thank you.
So we do have motion.
You've made the motion.
I made the motion.
The motion was second, you made it, and I
Yeah.
seconded it.
Yeah.
Roll call,
No
please,
problem.
Madam Clerk.
Mayor Zaragoza,
Yes.
Chair Perrello,
Yes.
Member Lopez,
Yes.
motion passes 3-0.
Thank you. Going to the next item, items for future agendas. Do you have any?
No.
I'd like to repeat what I mentioned the last time. We have a tremendous amount of people that use the sports park on Fifth Field. We use the park across the street from the airport on Fifth Street. You can go by today. There's a tremendous amount of athletic activities going there. There is one bathroom located in the Boys and Girls Club with a severely major chain around it with major locks on the doors. There's no restroom facilities. It's been that way for a long time. There needs to be a restroom. And the other part is, I'm continually seeing on social media that the south end of Oxnard is making comments with respect to the north end of Oxnard is having to now deal with what happens in the south end of Oxnard. When people, since there are no public restrooms, they use the public sidewalk. And I really want this to go to the city council or come back here. This has got to be addressed. We're not a third world country.
So, Mr. Chair, one more thing that I just mentioned, the downtown traffic study, maybe that could be a future agenda item because it was not part of the study, but in the future, I think Mr. Nash has a really good point on that. Thank you.
Would you want anything? Okay. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to this meeting. It's adjourned.